In this lesson, we're going to create several simple V-Ray materials and apply them to the house. Now, you'll notice that as I create the materials, I did say simple for a reason. I generally am the type of person who wants to have my materials rendering as quickly as possible, and I'm not that concerned about having every single slot filled up with some type of map. Generally, having a diffuse, bump, reflect is more than good enough in my books. So if you need more detail, then definitely have a look at certain courses that will go into much more detail about the mapping, or texturing rather. But as far as this course is concerned, what you're going to gain out of it is to find out how to set up materials that render quickly, render pretty well, and pretty much get your work out in a fraction of the time. So let's go ahead and open up the material editor. And I'm going to just remove some of these slots so that I can fill them up with new materials. And I'm going to just take my override and slot it down at the bottom of the list here. Then I can see that I already have my glass material. So next to the glass, I want to create a new V-Ray material. So just click on Standard, go down to V-Ray, and this is going to be called Frames. And it's going to be one of the simplest materials, which just is a very dark gray. You can make it any color you like. And it's going to have a decent amount of reflectivity with a reflective glossiness level of about 0.7. or 0.6. If you turn on your background, you can see some of that reflection happening a little bit more. Do note, however, as soon as this figure starts dropping down below 0.8 or so, then you do have to start looking at increasing your subdivisions. Otherwise, your texture will always look quite grainy. So I'm going to now start with the other materials. One of the materials that is quite helpful is just to have one called white simple or white plain, and this is just going to be a completely ordinary V-Ray texture with just an off-white color. Next, we're going to create the exterior walls. So I'm going to just make a basic V-Ray texture, and just to speed things up as well, let's just go and fill up all of the other slots with that basic default V-Ray texture as its base. So this one will be called walls underscore exterior. Into the diffuse, we can add a bitmap, and you can look in your texture folder that is in your project files and find the wall diffuse. Then if you go up a level, you can scroll down to the other maps, and you can just drag and copy the diffuse into the bump. Unless you want to go and create a specific bump in Photoshop, most of the time just dragging it across will help, but you do need to see whether the dark areas on your diffuse actually do correlate with the dark areas in the sort of depth of the image, if you can imagine it that way. Then if you have a very painted wall, then you would want to add some reflection. In our case, I'm not going to do that. I'm just going to leave it pretty plain. Next, I'm going to create the floor material. So this will be called floor interior, and this is going to be a stone texture, which we have over here, stone tiles, and that's what they look like. And since this is an interior, we're going to not worry too much about any roughness to them. We're just going to have a very light bump. 3 or 5 should do it. And we're going to give it a little bit of reflection, so a figure of about 10 should be fine, and the reflective glossiness will be 0.55. So that will give just this light sheen as we see it. So it's going to look like a relatively smooth or a sanded stone finish. So I'm going to do the rest of the slots now by just pausing the video, and then we can continue from there. I'll just show you if there are any materials that need special attention or that do anything different to these ones above, then I'll point them out. Otherwise, we'll just continue from there onwards. So I'm going to pause the video and we'll quickly fill up these material slots in the background. So now most of the other materials have been filled up, and the only ones that are really of any special interest, in other words they're different to the ones above, would be the floor parquet. Because it is quite a glossy texture, you would want to get some type of reflection, Fresnel reflection in it. So you could either choose to add that Fresnel and then just increase your reflectivity quite a lot. If that is rendering too slowly, you could also fake the Fresnels by just blackening out your reflection, and then into that slot add a fall off. And then that fall off would pretty much do something similar to what the Fresnel would. So meaning that around the front where you are facing the camera, it would be not reflective at all, and around the sides you would start reading that reflection. So the black would be the front and the lighter side would be the sides. So that would be a way of just faking those Fresnel reflections. The next one is the water. This one is generally quite tricky and it requires quite a bit of experimentation. I generally, once I figure it out, then I leave it and I copy paste it into new files. What I've done is I've made first of all a blue texture, and then I've added a texture onto it. So I can choose to either clear this texture just to show you what it looks like. It's like this. So it's a little bit of caustic reflections. These can sometimes look a little bit kitsch, so you may test out just a plain water. That's why I've left that blue underlay there. So I can just right click and clear it, and then that blue would be visible. Also, I've decreased this water to 50% so that I'm not getting the full impact of that highly colorful image. Then the reflections are more or less in the middle, and the refractions are slightly less than the glass, so that I'm getting a little bit more or a little bit less refraction happening, so I'm seeing more of that water. So this will spend a little bit more time in another lesson, because we still want to add a texture to this water that's falling over the edge, and this is quite a crucial part of the project, so we're going to spend a bit of time on that later on. So now let's go across to our model. We're going to turn off all of the layers and start turning them on one at a time. So in terms of slabs, let's go ahead and texture the bottom slab with the floor interior stone. Once that is textured, you can also select the button that says Show Standard Map in Viewport so that you can see it. In order to see it though, you do need to add a UVW map, so just type in UVW, enter. And as soon as you've applied it, have a look if you have any vertical areas on your model. If you do have any parts like this, you will need to add a box mapping. And one of the most important things to do is to always use the bitmap fit. So this basically changes the aspect ratio of the actual mapping to the size of your file. So now you can right click, use the gizmo, press the scale, and just scale down your UVW map. If you do know the exact size of the texture that you're applying, let's say you have a type of mosaic design or something that is at an exact scale, you can choose to use a real-world scale for your mapping. So you would just tick real-world scale and you could manually type in the size, width and the length of your texture that you're applying. In most cases, just to keep things moving quickly, it's a lot easier just to do it by eye, so that's the process that I've used in the past, and so far I haven't had any issues. So next I'm going to texture the rest of these floors, and I'm not necessarily going to be applying the UV map and everything to every single one on screen in front of you while you're watching. I'm going to do that on the side. Most of these are pretty simple to do. You just apply the map and set the UV scale to the right size. The one that I'd like to spend a little bit of time on right now is this element over here, which is going to be the timber deck just above the pool. And this is going to require a little bit of modeling. So that modeling is going to happen in the next lesson, where we're going to spend time segmenting it and adding the texture. But just to show you what it looks like, let me go and just take this part, and I'm just going to ring these edges, right click and connect, and then I just want to see the thickness of the timber. I'm going to select the top polys, grow that selection down, and I'm just going to detach this from the model. Then this is going to have a timber deck, which I'm going to now add a UVW map to, and let's have a look what the result is. Bitmap fit, down to timber deck, right click, gizmo, and scale down. Again, if you know what the width of this is, the other nice little trick here is to look in your top view, and let's say your client or the person giving you the specifications tells you exactly what the width is. You can always just take a square or a plane on the side, and then you can adjust this to the exact size. Let's say that you know that they are 16 millimeters wide, you could put that next to it and basically just scale it according to that size. So this is an easier way than counting each one of these verticals and then multiplying it and checking the exact size and using a real world scale. So this is a little bit of a shortcut. Also, sometimes you may find that it is a good idea to oversize certain textures, because when textures in some cases are at the real world scale, they do appear far too tiny in your scene when you render them, and it just looks like a mushy grain. So it is a good idea to test out your textures progressively as you're creating them, and in some cases just remember that it's quite easy to just enlarge them. So what we're going to do in the next lesson is we're going to go and segment this up into a whole lot of verticals so that we get more of a three-dimensional texture to this. And by the beginning of the next lesson, I would have also textured most of these other elements, including the walls, the frames, the glass is already done. The screen we're going to do in the next lesson as well. And then the stairs is just going to be glass and chrome. So we're going to look at that chrome material as well in one of the next lessons. So after that, the only other thing to texture will be the hardscape, and that we'll also do quite shortly. Great, so let's move on to the next lesson.